All right, good evening. I'm Eric Gilbert, and this is the Midnight Watch. Before we move forward tonight, I want to take just a moment to remind everyone where we left off last time, because this topic does build, and I really don't want anyone, feeling left out or lost or what have you. But before I get into that, if you would, just hit the like and the share buttons, if you would, please. And if you're not already a subscriber to the channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button too, and get notifications of future live streams and such. So in the last live stream, we were answering one foundational question. What went wrong before sacrifice ever existed? And let me just say this real quick. If you'd like to get fully caught up with the little series that I'm doing right now, feel free to check out the channel later and watch the posted lives that I already have up there. You can go ahead and get caught up with the last, 3 or 4. And that'll get you caught up to where we're at tonight. If you're with me tonight, that's great. I appreciate all of those who are faithful to the live streams, and also to those of you who catch up with me after they've been posted to the channel. So again, at your next convenience, just go ahead and check out the other posted live streams on the channel so that you can get caught up with this subject. That being said, let me go ahead and get back to the recap. So we were answering the foundational question of what went wrong before sacrifice ever existed. So, and what had we established? All right, so we talked about this. Blood did not become a problem because of violence. It became a problem because fellowship was broken. So we established that the last time we talked, okay? And why that was an issue. Give me a second here. My apologies once again. All right, so it's important to understand that when the fellowship broken came first, we discussed last time about the degradation of humanity, which was a slow degrading from the moment of the fall in the garden. But in terms of the whole of humanity, for the length of our existence, it really didn't take long at all for the manifestation of that degradation, which inevitably was Cain killing his brother Abel, right? The first bloodshed of humanity. Now, we're on the subject of blood and bloodlines. Why is this important? Why did I pick this subject of all things? And I know those of you who might be new to this channel might be confused as to why such a subject, especially just being a new channel. This is actually a subject that I had promised viewers probably a little over a year now when I was doing live streams on other platforms. Just wasn't able to get around to it because it's actually a very lengthy discussion because it covers a lot of territory. It has to do with, where we come from. Our blood and our bloodline has to do with where we come from. Why is it important to God? Because as you follow genealogies and bloodlines and what have you, it leads back all the way. We've already discussed this, back to Adam and inevitably back to God, because we are the physical makeup of what God is. And we've discussed that before too. So if you want to get caught up, all of that was discussed. All right. Why was it important for God to choose Mary specifically to bring his son out of his realm and into ours? Right? This wasn't just a chance meeting. It wasn't just pull a name from a hat and see what comes up. This was very specific, and it's very important. And why was it that Joseph was not permitted to be the physical father of the manifested God in flesh? And again, Mary was of the bloodline of David. So again, genealogy. And if she's of the bloodline of David, then that takes us back to Abraham. Abraham takes us back to Adam. Adam, of course, takes us right back to the Father. So God is keeping like the spiritual aspect of our existence on this fleshly plane, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to go ahead and get on with this so that we can move forward. Like I said, if you want to get caught up, just go ahead and check out the channel. So again, we were answering what went wrong before sacrifice ever existed. So that's the important issue tonight. What we established was this, that blood did not become a problem because of violence. It was a problem because the fellowship was broken. Why is this so important? Why do I keep harping on this broken fellowship between humanity and God at the Garden of Eden? All right, so, and why does that have anything to do with, our blood and our bloodline and our ties to God and what have you? Because a lot of people like to say, or love to say, we're all children of God. But because of the broken fellowship, that is not simply true anymore. We are all creations of God. But this fellowship was broken. The bloodline spiritually was tainted. The lie of the devil, and again, we discussed this already. You really need, I hate to keep harping on this, you really need to get caught up with this because recapping just takes forever. But, okay, so the fellowship being broken is important because it ruined everything. So now God has to bridge the gap between us and him, which brought in the sacrificial system. Why was sacrificial blood important? And we're leading into all of that as well. Okay, but why was bloodshed important when it was bloodshed that didn't really start all of this, but it was the manifestation of human degrading, which was a promise that God made in the Garden of Eden prior to the fall. Okay, it wasn't a threat. God was simply saying, if you break this fellowship, all of this wickedness that exists in a realm outside of this protection will become part of your existence, and you will die. And of course, the devil lies and tells Eve, you're not going to die. In fact, if anything, it's quite the opposite. You're going to be like gods, knowing good and evil, and so on. Okay, so when the fellowship was broken, once the seal of God's protection was broken, okay, this is where everybody gets it wrong, that just because Adam and Eve didn't physically die in that moment, that God must be a liar. But God is not man that he should lie, and that's very biblical. God tells us that. I am not a man that I should lie. That's that's a you thing, that's a me thing, that's a human aspect, right? That's a human trait, because of the broken fellowship. But let God be true and every man a liar. God's not going to lie to us. So when they disobeyed God, the fellowship was broken, and they did die spiritually. And this is important, that fellowship is broken. The blood is now tainted, right, in a spiritual aspect. And yes, they did physically die, just not that day. The beginning of decay leading to death begins in this moment. So you could essentially say, yes, they died and they took all of humanity with them. Okay, and so what we establish is this. Blood became the problem because of the fellowship being broken. The death of Abel is just simply a manifestation of the degradation of humanity now. It's very early on in the game, but it happened, and it needed to happen. It's a sad event, and I know somebody's going to take that the wrong way. We don't justify murder and what have you, but I'm simply saying all of this is a process that's going to lead us into that bridge that God has to build to cover the gap between us and him and allow us the opportunity to make the decision to come back to him. All right, so in Genesis chapter 3 that we looked at last time, death enters the human story before the murder ever appears. And that tells us something critical, that death begins as a separation from God, not as bloodshed. Okay? When fellowship broke, humanity was expelled from God's immediate presence. And once that relationship was broken, blood became exposed to guilt, which is what we covered last time. It's now exposed to guilt. So I'm going to break from my notes and share this with you, okay? John 3:16 and 17. This is very important, okay? Now, very, very familiar verse. It's all very common for all of us, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. But if you just read one verse further, right? It says, for God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Now, here's the bridge that we must be willing to cross through Jesus Christ. Okay, but the important part of that verse I want to share with you tonight is the very first part of verse 17 that says, God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. So I've asked before, why, okay, of all the time that has spanned, all the wickedness that has existed throughout mankind, and yet God sends his Son Jesus into our realm. The very Son of God himself, the physical manifestation of God in our presence. So you would think, now this is the time that God is going to bring judgment and condemnation to the wicked. And yet John 3:17 says, for God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world. Why not? It's really very simple, because we're talking about, the tainted bloodline, the broken fellowship and what have you way back in the Garden of Eden. So he didn't have to come to condemn us. We're already condemned. You understand? This is why when he tells them in the garden, if you do this thing, thou shalt surely die. And that was a fact, and it took all of humanity with them forever. From then on, everyone born is going to die. Okay? So Jesus says, I didn't come to condemn the world. You're already condemned. I came to build that bridge. Actually, Jesus came to finish that bridge, because the bridge was begun back in the Old Testament with the whole sacrificial system and the Torah teachings or law, however you want to look at that. This was a long process leading up to, and Jesus becomes the final board nailed to the bridge to complete the project. Okay? He is the bridge. So as he's hanging on the cross and he looks up and says, it is finished. It's done. He came to do what he came to do, or he finished what he came to do. So the bridge is now complete. And anybody willing to cross that bridge to him now becomes a child of his yet again, and becomes grafted back in like a healthy branch grafted into a healthy vine, right? Anybody who's ever seen the grafting process, whether, I don't know, National Geographic or Home and Garden or whatever, I don't know, somebody out there should have covered this by now. We should all know what it means to be grafted in. I don't know how many of you have gone through Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, what have you, to learn how to graft a small branch into a small tree and what have you. There's a little process, and it takes time and healing, right? And this is what he's telling us. You are now grafted in, and now we are back with the vine, receiving the nutrients that come up from the vine and growing in good health and bearing fruit in the vine. We are one of his again. Okay? And if any branch, this is scripture now, if any branch doesn't bear fruit, it is good for nothing, but to be cut off and cast into the fire. What use is it, right? So then in Genesis chapter 4, Abel's murder doesn't create the problem, as we've said before. It reveals it. His blood cries out because blood now testifies where fellowship once covered. And now we talked briefly about the earth, and I had to kind of step lightly on this one because there's a lot of people who believe in, the whole Mother Earth thing. This is Mother Earth is our mother and what have you, but this is all part of, excuse me, I guess if you want to call it an ecosystem in God. This is an existence that he created of himself. So again, all part of the process. He brings everything into existence and then breathes the breath of life into man, so everything belongs to God. But the fellowship is broken, so everything is tainted. Now the ground, and see how we're all related through blood, through the earth, and into God. Do you understand? So now the ground cries out for justice because of Abel's being murdered. When God comes to Cain and says, "Where's your brother?" And Cain's like, in fact, I got it right here, I think. Unless I accidentally flipped the chapter here. Let's see. Scroll back here. Okay, and the Lord said unto Cain, "Where is Abel thy brother?" And he said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, "What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from your hand." And so on and so forth. And then, of course, there's going to be some judgments given here, but this is what I'm talking about. And then, of course, later in the chapter we covered last week, or earlier this week, about, Cain being concerned that if he goes out into the world, because he's being banished now, and he's begging God, you can't do this to me because they will kill me. Who? And how are they going to know that you're a murderer and a criminal and cast this particular brand of judgment upon you for this? How would they know? Right? So God has to put a mark on Cain to tell everyone else in the world, don't touch him. This one belongs to me. I got this one handled. Okay? Just to kind of ease Cain's mind about, don't worry about it. I'm not going to let anyone handle you. I got you. I got you handled. Don't worry about it. But this is what I'm saying. So the ground cries out for justice. Now Cain is concerned about being murdered for what he had done, but nobody else should know what happened unless he opens his mouth, right? Except for, this is the early stages of humanity. I don't want to get too deep into this because then it sounds, like mysticism, and it's not. I'm just trying to tell you that we're all connected. And, sometimes, how do I approach this cautiously? Because this is not the kind of channel I want to develop here. Sometimes there are people who are particularly sensitive to spiritual matters. Let's put it that way. And they can just tell when something's wrong or something is off. Whether it's about a circumstance, about a person, a place, which is why a lot of people don't like to go into abandoned houses or buildings because, something's off or whatever. The earth cries out. When injustices have been done against humanity, the earth cries out and screams out for justice. And God says, I'm going to take care of it. And I know there's a world of people out there that don't believe that God is going to handle business, because here we are, these many thousands of years later. I'm not here to discuss the timeline of humanity. These many thousands of years later, and God still hasn't handled anything, so I don't believe in God. This is, just religious dogma, and you're creating religious trauma talking about these things, yada, yada. But we've also talked about the timeline of humanity and how we exist in the realm of a 24-hour clock, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and that is not the realm that God exists in. God exists in a realm all his own, where one day is as 1,000 years to him, and 1,000 years is as a single day. So in other words, every single thing in God's realm is all happening in real time in his realm. From beginning to the end of humanity is all happening in real time in God's realm. Okay? It's hard for us to wrap our minds around that. And anyway, so I'm going to move on because, we could spend days discussing that. But, all right, so in Genesis 4, Abel's murder doesn't create the problem. It reveals it. This is what's important. This revealing of the problem is, as I said, this is now the physical manifestation of the degradation that God said would happen if you break the fellowship. So his blood is now crying out because blood now testifies where fellowship once covered. What's important is how God responds. And this is incredibly important now because God could have responded any way he wanted to, right? And to answer the question for the many people out there who are critical of the way that God chose to respond to human wickedness and sin and degradation, right? If God didn't destroy humanity, then he just doesn't care. So what's important is how God responds. He doesn't erase humanity. We talked about this, right? You got to get caught up with me and watch those other videos. So he doesn't erase humanity. Why doesn't God erase humanity? Because the erasure of humanity and then starting over, with a whole new human project just opens the doorway for the same problem to exist over again, because he's going to create the same project with free will. Okay. Now this opens floodgates for the very next question. I can just hear it now. So God isn't all-knowing then. If he was all-knowing, he wouldn't allow humanity to have done this in the first place, right? If he was all-knowing, let's say he did scrap the project and erase humanity and start all over again, then that means he's fallible. No. This is why he didn't erase humanity. Okay? That would make him appear fallible. The fact is, yes, he knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew exactly how it was going to play out, which is why he already had a plan laid out for our indiscretions, for the free will that he gave us to utilize. So he's not going to erase humanity. He's going to respond to the injustice, okay? He doesn't destroy Cain either, and he doesn't abandon the earth. Instead, God responds with restraint. And this is how we get grace and mercy. Because without mercy, God will not extend grace. Without grace, we don't stand a chance. So yes, God responds with restraint. Cain is then marked. Vengeance is now limited against Cain. The blood guilt is acknowledged. Still not resolved yet, but it is acknowledged. So the conclusion we have reached in the last live stream is that redemption doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with restraint. If God didn't restrain himself, we'd all be done for. So that's where we stopped. Okay. And tonight we're going to move into what God introduces next. Not redemption yet, structure. So if fellowship is broken and blood now carries guilt, then humanity needs a way back. Not by ignoring blood, but by answering it. You understand? If God had done away with us at the very beginning simply because we sinned, then he's not answering the blood guilt. He's just perpetuating the problem by creating us all over again, and then somebody else is inevitably going to break the chain again. So now we're going to set into motion a response for the human inadequacy. It's not God's inadequacy, it's ours. Okay? We are the fallible ones. And he's going to answer that for us and give us a way back. And again, that also responds to our free will, because we still have that. We can still do whatever we want, but there are either rewards or consequences for the decisions that we make. And inevitably, no matter what you choose to do, you are born, every single human being is born, actually conceived, into the nature of the sin and degradation that exists in our realm. You are already born tainted. You are conceived into a tainted world. So God has given us a way back. All right, so let's continue on. Abel's blood doesn't cry out because blood is mystical. All right, I can't say that enough ways. I mentioned that a few times on the last stream. This is very important. This is not something we get to mess with. I know all through history, pagan religions have messed with blood sacrifices and mixing blood with drinks and what have you for power and for various other reasons. But blood is not mystical. It cries out because life is taken unjustly, and it demands an answer in God's moral order. So in Genesis 9, we see post-flood, we see restraint, and in Romans 5:12, a brief reference to Romans 5:12. So let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick before I move on. Let's see, Romans. All right. So wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin. And so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. And some of you might be willing to say, well, that's just not fair. It's fair in the sense that how do I put this? Okay, it's not fair. Sin, being born and conceived into something you had no control over doesn't seem fair. It's not fair. But again, there's a bridge to come back from that. It's not fair that some people are born into human deficiencies of some kind due to genetics within their family, which is why a lot of your medical practitioners will ask you a ton of questions. Is there heart disease in your family? Is there aneurysms and brain disease? Is there mental illness? Is there this, that, and the other thing? So they want to know how far back they got to look to be able to help you effectively. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. All right, so nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. Not as an offense, so also is the free gift. For if through the offense of one many be dead, much more the grace of God and the gift of grace, which is also by one man, Jesus Christ, hath abounded many. I know that sounds very confusing, but this is God talking about, actually it's Paul, but we're being inspired by God to write this, to say, this is the bridge back to me, if you want it. So God restrains vengeance to prevent collapse, and unlimited vengeance would destroy humanity. So if God had not marked Cain, let's say, and sent Cain off into the world, he banishes him from the area where he was born and raised and familiar and says, nope, you can't live here no more, you got to go off. All right, so if he had sent him out there on his own, unprotected and unmarked, he's now vulnerable to the rest of the world for annihilation. And now begins a serial killing series justified by man alone and not by God. Now we've got vigilantes, a world full of paw avengers, because, you killed my paw, I'm coming for you, God can't have that. So he restrains the vengeance to prevent the collapse. And the unlimited vengeance would destroy humanity. So he's got to create a way to keep that from happening and to bridge the gap. So blood guilt exists, but God does not yet resolve it. It's in the process. And then comes the Torah law. And then throughout history, we are going to live by that. And then comes Jesus and so on. We're getting there. Restraint preserves the story until redemption can enter it. And that's another important point. Like, this is very important stuff. I know it sounds kind of boring, but restraint preserves the human story until redemption can enter it. Okay? Now, God is preparing the way. And really, I mean, it's kind of an act of human agreement with God that we're going to try to behave ourselves in accordance to his will to keep that degradation from expanding. And I know there's a lot of people who think, if you need a book to tell you how to be a moral person, then you're just not a moral person. But as I've said many countless times, and I've said in previous streams on my new channel here, there is no moral code without God. There is none. I don't want to get off onto a whole different subject, but like for those that believe in evolution, that we came from nothing and somehow, like, I don't want to get into the long string of that tonight. It just burns up the clock. But, we came from nothing. Nothing exploded into everything. Everything fell into line in the universe. And then all of a sudden, over billions of years, decided to grow into planets, suns, stars. And suddenly, out of nowhere, one particular planet decides it's going to develop the ability to sustain life and then begin to grow life, right? And then, of course, comes, I don't know what comes next, the goo, then the tadpole, and then I don't know, the animals, i.e. the apes, then the Neanderthal, then the human. All of this happening over millions and billions of years. And somehow in the process of all of this, we develop our own sense of morality out of nothingness. You understand? This it's not possible. Without the already existent moral code into our existence, who's going to have the thought process to say, hey, we shouldn't do this or that? That's not right. The Bible even speaks to this sort of thing. Every man does what is right in his own eyes, right? But the ends thereof are the ways of death. We're not the smart ones. We like to believe we are, but we're not the smart ones. God's got this, and we just need to learn to live by God's moral code, okay? Yeah, we got plenty of time. All right, so covenant. God introduces structure. Genesis 9 gives us the Noahic covenant. Genesis 12 and 15, Abraham. And covenant is God's way of governing the relationship. Covenant sets boundaries around the blood guilt. We've got to answer the blood guilt. Why? Because we are of God. We are created in his image. And we are the physical manifestation of everything that God is. The atoms and the cells and yada yada. We've already discussed this many times. And so we broke the fellowship and we tainted the blood. And so now there's the blood guilt and it must be answered. So God initiates covenant. Man does not. God is in control. Blood is tied to covenant because life is at stake. Covenant doesn't erase guilt. It contains it. See, how did we start? In this protective bubble of God's grace and mercy, of perfection. And God says, don't break it, because there's a whole universe of stuff out here that you don't want in your realm. So don't break the seal. All right, but we broke the seal, and in came everything. So covenant doesn't erase the guilt, it contains it. Okay? Almost like bringing back that seal, where in the New Testament we see God says, once we've been born again, you are what? Sealed unto the day of redemption. You're back in covenant with God. You're back in fellowship with God. You are covered by the blood. And I know there's a world of people who misinterpret that, thinking, how gross to think that you would be literally covered in blood. But you are covered by the price paid by the shed blood. You understand? You're not physically or spiritually covered in blood. It's the spilled blood of Jesus Christ that paid the penalty of sin, which is death, and gave us the opportunity to rejoin the fellowship and be resealed unto the day of redemption. Okay. Substitution. Mercy is now built into the system. Again, what did I say a few moments ago? Without mercy, God's not extending any grace. What is grace? Grace is undeserved favor. In other words, he forgives even if we don't deserve it. Right? But without having some shred of mercy in his heart, what incentive would he have to extend that grace to us? So Scripture anchors this in Genesis 22 with Isaac, Leviticus 17:11, and then, of course, Exodus imagery, etc., on down the line, right? I'm trying to speed this up a little bit because I'm rapidly running out of time. But Scripture anchors this principle. All right, teaching points, right? So substitution equals the innocent standing in for the guilty. Okay? That's substitution. It's the innocent standing in for the guilty. So in the Old Testament, he initiated this covenant process of sacrifice by way of, a perfect lamb without spot or blemish for the sake of, sanctification and redemption. And there's various levels to all of this, but that's the process of something innocent standing in for the guilty. It's required, which is why, and then of course, the process becomes tainted because humanity gets in the way of that, right? But God is not dumb, and he is not negligent. He already knew that would happen. He already had a plan in place to take care of that, which is why he knew his son Jesus needed to come to be that final sacrifice, to say, I'm taking this out of your hands entirely. You people can't get anything right. That's why you can't have nice things, right? So he takes it out of our hands by Jesus Christ dying and taking the place of the lamb. He now becomes the lamb, the sacrifice. Now there's no more sacrificial system. It's just coming to Christ. He is the sacrifice. And by way of this movement, I don't want to get too deep into this, but he puts himself in place of not only the sacrifice, but also the high priest, because it was only the high priest that could do this and sprinkle the blood and do this, that, and the other thing in the Holy of Holies. So now he makes himself the sacrifice and the high priest. We just come to God. That's it. And God provides the substitute, which is why we saw in the Old Testament Abraham being asked to sacrifice his son Isaac. This is a huge point of disgruntlement, I guess, with the world. What kind of a God would you worship that would require a man to give his own son? He never intended for Abraham to sacrifice his son. There were a couple of things happening here. Number one, he needed to see just how far Abraham was willing to go in obedience to God, because Abraham is to now be the father of countless many generations. This is the promise. Now, we also know that through his children, through his seed, that this is going to be made possible. So why would God ask him or require of him to sacrifice his son? It doesn't make sense. But this is also a representation. It's going to make it real to Abraham what's going to happen in the future. The future covenant with mankind is going to be this way. And God wanted him to see that through God providing his own sacrifice will the redemption of man come. And so all of these nations that are going to come from your seed, Abraham, are going to have the opportunity to come back to me, because I'm going to provide the sacrifice. So when the angel stops him from killing his son, he said, look over there. And Abraham sees a ram caught up in the thicket, and that's, the sheep, or the lost sheep that God is going to use. He brought to Abraham to say, there's the sacrifice. Go ahead and use that. I would never have asked you to give your son, but I'm very grateful that you were willing to show me your dedication, because let me get to this here real quick. Okay. Well, I appreciate you being willing to be here to listen. I hope something here resonates with you. Feel free to ask whatever you need to ask. I do try to pay attention to that as I'm talking. Sometimes I get to going on and on, but I'm here. So anyway, God provides the sacrifice. Again, this is all representation, much like baptism. It's representation of this process. But it all represents our hearts and our willingness to go the distance with God. When Jesus said, unless a person hates his father and his mother and his brothers and sisters and so on and follows me. And so again, more contention with the world, who thinks that God really wants us to hate our families and our friends in order to follow him. It's not a hate as in, I can't stand you, you disgust me. It's all else comes secondary to God. God is the most important thing to me. I lead my life by godly principles. By those principles, I lead my wife and my children. By those principles, I guide my work on my job and so forth. Well, how does this all play in spirituality? Because if I'm living the best way I can as a human being, the best way I can, living by God's principles, right? Let's just take the 10 commandments, 10 very simple rules, like don't be killing people, don't look at your neighbor's wife, don't covet your neighbor's belongings, right? It's so simple stuff. And yet, if you looked at those 10 very simple laws that God gave Moses back in the Old Testament, we wouldn't need the libraries of law books in existence today, because we wouldn't be violating the very natural laws that God had instilled within us, within our society, within our humanity. There is a moral code that exists. It had to be encoded into our existence in order for it to be. This is why I say you can't have morality without God. If you believe in evolution, there's absolutely no way whatsoever we could ever have developed a moral code, because we would live by whatever made sense to us. Oh, you wronged me, I'm going to kill you. Makes sense to me. What's to say it's wrong? There's no moral code. Who's developing a moral code? It has to be, it's a code, so it has to be in the program. All right, let me move on. I get a little too let's see here. Where did I leave off? Pagan sacrifice versus God-ordained sacrifices. What's the difference? It's a huge difference, as we've already discussed in previous videos. Again, so if you want to get caught up, you have to go watch the other videos that are in my channel. But blood is not payment. It represents life. So God never asks man to solve guilt. He did that. He provides the answer. He did that through that perfect lamb sacrifice system. And then by way of giving his son, when I told you a minute ago, John 3:17, I didn't come into the world to condemn the world. Why? Because we're already condemned. We're already conceived and born into corruption. I came so that those who want life can have life and have it more abundantly. But again, it's our choice. I'm free to do whatever I want to do. God's not forcing anyone to do anything we don't want to do. He's just simply built the bridge to bring us back into fellowship. So what the sacrificial system is and what it isn't, okay? It's not magic. It is not appeasement of the gods. That would be more pagan, right? It is not violence for its own sake. It's not some vigilante form of justice. What is it? It's a temporary covering. It is a teaching system, and it is a visible acknowledgement of guilt and mercy. All right? The sacrificial system is a temporary covering. The permanency of that covering comes someday. That's why he says, once we come to him, you are sealed unto the day of redemption. Redemption comes later. Redemption comes when we're all there before the throne. It's either rewards or punishment time. Where are we going with this, right? So we are sealed unto the day of redemption. Yes, life is, absolutely, yes. Life is in the blood. So, again, it is a teaching system. Sacrifice is not the cure. It is the bridge. I'll say it over and over again so that everybody understands. Nothing is being cured about the human sin-sickened soul condition. Nothing's being cured by the sacrificial system. It is just the bridge. Sacrifice is not a cure. So what this means, biblically, not emotionally, let's define that part, okay? What do we mean by the cure? All right, so in Scripture, the cure is full restoration of fellowship with God. And that means guilt is removed, separation is ended, right? Justice is satisfied, and the relationship is restored. The cure is not temporary covering or repeated ritual. See, he did away with the repeated ritual. It wasn't working, because every time mankind gets its hands into something, we ruin everything. Like I said a minute ago, that's why you can't have nothing nice, right? So we had to end the repeated ritual. The cure is not delayed consequence, though. Okay? Excuse me. The cure is not the absence of guilt. It is the restoration of fellowship. Excuse me. My apologies. This is an important distinction, though, and I need you to understand this. The cure is not the absence of guilt, as if it never happened. It is the restoration of fellowship. He's bringing us back into fellowship, and that's important. You can't say guilt never happened, because our very existence is proof otherwise. Why sacrifice cannot be the cure? First of all, animal sacrifice cannot remove sin. Hebrews 10:4, right? Animal sacrifice cannot restore fellowship permanently. This was temporary measures. Excuse me. It cannot change human nature because we are what we are. We are what was brought into our realm by way of sin. And sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. This is a promise of God. So now we have to live out. We have to live out this process. But at the end, okay, this is what's important. This is why the decision to follow Christ or not to follow Christ is important. And I know that the world gets very angry at Christianity over its ideology of eternal separation from God. Why would God throw people to hell just because we don't want to be a part of God? And my question to you is, why would God allow you in his house if you've spent your entire life pushing him away and saying, get out of mine? You understand? And I've used this analogy when I used to do my live streams on Facebook before, but it's kind of perfect, really. If you're having a get-together, a neighborhood get-together at your home, and for whatever reason, right, let's say you just don't like me at all, and you see me coming with my pan of, dish to pass, and you see me coming, and you're like, stop right there. I don't even want you on my property. I don't want you on my porch. Get out of here. I don't like you. Whatever. I don't want you here. Get out of my house. I have no alternative but to turn around and walk away because I'm not wanted here. So I go to my home. But let's say next summer I get myself together and I'm like, well, I'm going to throw one big block party at my place. The whole neighborhood's invited. But then I see you coming. I'm like, you know what? I kind of don't want you here. Like, you made a big fuss the last time, and you did it very publicly to make sure that I understood I was not welcome at your home. I don't want you at mine either. It's no different. Well, what about God's grace and mercy? That's the whole process here that we're talking about. The grace and the mercy comes through the process. Right. Well, yes. Okay, so I desire mercy or covenant loyalty, not sacrifice. Yes, that's where I'm trying to build into that, but I'm taking the long route here, getting around to, of course, I've talked about it already, about Jesus being the final sacrifice, so that we're not the ones doing anything. God did it all. We just need to make a decision which route we're going to go. I'm going to go over the river and through the woods to avoid the bridge over the gap, or just take the bridge and return to fellowship, right? All right, so let's see. Sacrifice. If it could, it wouldn't need repetition. If animal sacrifice could, it wouldn't point forward and it wouldn't end. If it could do these other things, if it could remove sin, if it could restore fellowship, if it could change the human nature, if it could heal the root fracture, then it wouldn't need repetition. It wouldn't point forward and it wouldn't end. Okay? So sacrifice deals with consequence, not cause. Sacrifice manages the blood guilt. It doesn't eliminate it. That's why it's not the cure. Jesus is the cure, but again, you've got to be very specific when you're reading Scripture. When he says you are sealed, right? When we come to him, you are sealed. That's a promise unto the day of redemption. What the bridge means is this, okay? And this is key. A bridge connects two separated sides. It's really just that simple, right? It allows passage without removing the gap, all right? It would take forever to backfill the hole in the ground, right? So it just allows us to be able to pass over that broken fellowship. And, excuse me, a bridge exists because separation is very real. There is a definite separation between humanity and God. Now, I have to be careful about the way I say things sometimes, because I wanted to say, doesn't matter what religion you are, It kind of does, because there's only one pathway to eternal light. It's not by inner reflection. It's not within myself. The world loves to teach, and even the modern church is starting to teach that God is within you. God is you. You are the light. You know, we are nothing without God. Without God, we can do nothing. You can't save yourself from eternal separation from yourself. We must walk the bridge if we wish to be saved, right? A bridge allows passage without removing the gap. It exists because separation is real. Sacrifice acknowledges guilt honestly, it preserves justice, and it allows the continued relationship to go on, and it prevents total separation. The sacrifice doesn't deny the fracture, it makes a way across it. That's biblical justice. Okay? Why is this about justice and not vengeance? Well, we just talked about that a minute ago, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but this is where people get confused, because vengeance says someone must suffer because I'm angry. That's what I said a few minutes ago about that vigilante justice mentality. You know, you wronged me, so I must therefore punish you. Justice says truth must be honored and guilt must be answered. And God's system is justice, not vengeance. Okay? Key facts to this are that God provides the sacrifice. He already did. And God sets the terms. See, this is all God's creation. My failure to understand the unsaved world in terms of this. When you're angry at God or the Bible or Christianity or the church, whatever, however you want to look at it, okay? So, where was I going? Wow. Wow. Just like a freight train off the tracks. Gone. Give me a minute, it'll come back to me. All right, so God provides a sacrifice. He sets the terms. There we go. All right, so God sets the terms. All right. Why is God, if he is the creator of all things, why is he not allowed to set the terms? Why does humanity feel like it is our right to set the terms between us and God? It is not our right, and it is not our place. This is not our anything. We didn't do any of this. God created, God brought into existence, and God can do whatever he wants. And instead of, like I said a few moments ago, instead of destroying us, he built a pathway for us to return. He tempered justice, right, with mercy. So God limits bloodshed for this reason. No more vengeance, no vengeance, right? And God forbids human sacrifice, which is why there's a huge world of difference between Christianity and pagan. Let me follow this. Therefore, know that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments. Exactly, yes. Exactly. All right? Now, if this were vengeance, God would demand suffering. Whose God demands suffering? Not ours. God would accept human blood if this was about vengeance. He doesn't want human blood. God would escalate violence. See, these are the gods of other belief systems and pagan gods and so forth. These are the gods that would demand suffering and human sacrifice and would escalate violence. God wants to contain the blood guilt and just recreate fellowship with us. And so God does the opposite. Justice restrains the chaos, and vengeance multiplies it. Sacrifice restrains chaos. That sacrifice was already made, and all we have to do is come to him. Which is why, and I've said this before, and I'm almost out of time here, but that's okay. I'll take just maybe 2 or 3 more minutes if you can bear with me, okay? So at the cross, when the earth shook and the earth opened up and split all the way down to the temple, and then the temple, began to shake and got busted up, and the temple veil, that giant curtain that split, that separated all the outside world from the Holy of Holies, it split open in that earthquake and exposed the entirety of the world to the Holy of Holies. That was a very purposeful thing that God did. This was a very public announcement that we are now free to come to God directly. Come unto me, all you who weary and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. There's no need to go to the high priest. There's no more need for any sacrificial anything. Come to me. My door is always open. So how does sacrifice protect humanity? I'm going to take just, like I said, just a couple more minutes here and then I'll close it out. Without sacrifice, blood guilt accumulates. Vengeance escalates. Humanity destroys itself. Sacrifice absorbs the guilt symbolically, and it stops the spiral spiritually and preserves the people, assuming we are living within the fellowship. We're talking about this right now, about living within that fellowship. You have to cross that bridge into the path that God has set forth, right? If you're within that fellowship, then yes, your way is preserved, and that's biblical as well. Yes, Jesus is in fact our high priest. Thank you for that. Let's see. Sacrifice isn't about satisfying wrath. It's about preserving life until redemption arrives. I've said that a moment ago, but I got to clarify these things sometimes. Okay, let's see. Where are we at? It's 1 minute after. Gosh, I've got just a few more notes here. So if you want to bear with me, I'm here. If not, you can catch this video on my channel later, probably tomorrow. So anyway, God's role, this is where God's role matters, okay? This only works because God initiates it. Again, the creator of all things has every right to do what he wants to do, and he has now tempered his justice with mercy. And so he initiates this covenant path. God provides the sacrifice. God limits the shedding of blood. And then God ends the broken fellowship if we receive it, though, you understand. Again, there's that free will thing that the world can't grasp. I don't know why. We have the right to do what we choose to do. It's just we have to be willing to, accept either the rewards or the consequences of the choices. So man does not invent sacrifice to manipulate God. That's paganism. Biblical sacrifice flows from God's mercy, not human fear. All right, sacrifice is not the cure because it doesn't restore the fellowship. It's just a bridge. It allows the relationship to continue without denying justice. All right, so why, let's see here. Yeah, why this couldn't be the end? Repetition proves incompleteness. This was part of the problem with the old sacrificial system, okay? All right, so it was essentially an incomplete process, which is why we find that, souls are in limbo, in paradise or whatever you want to call it. And then Jesus had at the cross, right, when he died, he goes to hell and ministers and what have you, and so on. Okay, so anyway, repetition proves incompleteness. Blood of animals cannot restore fellowship. We talked about that. The system points forward, and something greater than us and something greater than anything we can do is required, and God fulfilled that on our behalf. If blood must be offered again and again, the work isn't finished, is it? But what did Jesus say on the cross? It is finished. Okay? And here's the close. God has restrained chaos, as I said. He has tempered justice with mercy. God has preserved humanity. God has established covenant. But fellowship is not yet restored. We are only sealed again unto the day of redemption, okay? Tonight we have seen how God contains the problem. And the next time we meet, we're going to see how he ends it, okay? How does God end the problem? So I will leave a notation on my Facebook as to when the next live stream is going to be, and I'll probably make a short here on my channel just so anybody else can follow along and figure out where I'm going with the next one. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to move this particular topic over to a series of just videos that I'm going to record and post to my channel, so that on the next live we can hopefully pick up on a different subject, because this is kind of lengthy. This is like 4 or 5 videos long already, and I've still got a couple more to do. So I'm going to try to do a long form video recording. We'll see how the week plays out, so just stay tuned. Be watching the shorts. I'll interject some live stream advertisements in there to let you know when the next live stream will be. But for now, I just finished this notes, and it's going to take me at least a couple of days to start the next live stream. So, all right. Anyway, thank you very much for those of you that were here with me tonight. I really do appreciate that. And thank you so much for the engagement, for the comments, for the questions. I appreciate that as well. Again, hit the subscribe button and let those notifications hit you so you'll know when the next live stream is, when the shorts pop up and all of that. I really appreciate you guys for being here. Thank you. And for those of you who will watch this later on after it's been posted, thank you for watching and for being faithful as well. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. You all have a wonderful evening and a very happy and blessed new year.